Every neighborhood has secrets. But in the quiet suburbs of Maplewood, one woman held all the power, until I crossed her path. My name is Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how a simple fence turned into a war with Victoria Sterling, the ruthless leader of our homeowners association. She called 911 on me, humiliated my family, and tried to destroy everything we had worked for. But little did she know, I was about to uncover her darkest secrets and give the entire neighborhood something they'd never forget: the truth. This is how I got the last laugh. Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone smiled but no one really saw. Perfect lawns, white picket fences, and neighbors who waved from their porches. But behind closed doors, secrets festered like weeds in a garden. I moved here with my daughter Sophie, hoping to leave our pain behind. My wife, her mother, had passed away 2 years ago, and this neighborhood seemed like a fresh start. But what I didn't know then was that Maplewood wasn't just about appearances. It was ruled by fear. Fear of Victoria Sterling. Victoria Sterling wasn't just the president of the Homeowners Association, she was the HOA. Her word was law, her smile a mask for manipulation. She fined people for painting their front doors the wrong shade of beige, banned children from playing outside after 6 p.m., and once even forced a family to remove their Christmas lights because they were too bright. No one dared cross her, until I did. It started innocently enough. I noticed Victoria driving through a narrow dirt path that cut through several backyards, including mine. It wasn't a public road. It was private property. When I asked her politely to stop using it as her personal shortcut, she laughed in my face, so I put up a fence, a simple wooden fence. That's when the nightmare began. At first, it felt like small annoyances. My mailbox was vandalized. Anonymous letters appeared on my doorstep accusing me of being a troublemaker. Then came the fines, ridiculous ones, for having overgrown grass. It wasn't. For parking my car too close to the curb. I wasn't. And even for letting Sophie ride her bike on the sidewalk, which is perfectly legal. But Victoria wasn't done yet. One morning, as I sipped coffee on my porch, I heard the wail of sirens growing louder. 2 police officers stepped out of their cruiser and headed straight for my door. My heart sank. What could she possibly have accused me of now? And more importantly, how far was she willing to go? When I opened the door that morning, my stomach churned at the sight of the 2 officers standing there. They weren't smiling. "Mr. Carter," one of them said, holding up a piece of paper, "we've received a complaint about you blocking an emergency access route." My jaw dropped. Emergency access? That dirt path Victoria used wasn't marked on any official map. It was nothing more than a shortcut she'd been exploiting for years. But somehow, she'd twisted the truth again. Before I could explain, Sophie appeared. Behind me, her eyes wide with fear. "Dad, what's going on?" she whispered. The officers didn't care about explanations. They just handed me a warning and left. As they drove away, I caught a glimpse of Victoria across the street, watching from her window with a smug grin plastered across her face. Things only got worse after that day. Victoria's campaign against me became relentless. She started spreading rumors around the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable and dangerous. Parents began pulling their kids away when Sophie tried to talk to them at school. Even the local grocery store cashier gave me strange looks, as if I were some kind of criminal. It felt like living in a nightmare where no one believed the truth. Not even the people who had once called themselves friends. One evening, as I sat alone in the dark staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. Victoria wasn't just trying to punish me. She wanted to erase me from the neighborhood, from Sophie's life, from existence itself. But then, late one night, I found hope in the most unexpected place. While taking out the trash, I noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry bags into her house. It was Martha Bennett, a reclusive neighbor known for her sharp tongue and eccentric habits. When I offered to help, she eyed me suspiciously before finally letting me inside. Her home was cluttered with old newspapers and photographs, but one picture caught my attention: a younger Victoria shaking hands with a man whose face had been scratched out. "You think you're the first person she's destroyed?" Martha asked bitterly. That's when she told me everything: the blackmail, the lies, the scandals Victoria had buried over the years. For the first time since this madness began, I felt a flicker of control. But as I left Martha's house, a chilling thought crossed my mind. If she knew all this, why hadn't she spoken up before? And what price would either of us pay for exposing the truth? That photograph Martha gave me became my lifeline. It wasn't much, just a grainy image of Victoria with a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out. But it was proof that she had something to hide. I spent hours poring over it, trying to piece together the puzzle. Who was the man? Why did his identity matter so much? And how far would Victoria go to keep this secret buried? The questions haunted me, but they also fueled me. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, I felt like I had a purpose beyond survival. Sophie noticed the change in me, too. "Dad, you've been acting weird lately," she said one evening as we ate dinner. "Weirder than usual." I forced a laugh, but inside I knew she was right. This fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting her from the toxic world Victoria had created. Sophie, however, wasn't content to sit on the sidelines. One afternoon, she came home buzzing with excitement. "You'll never guess what happened today," she said, practically bouncing in her seat. Apparently, she'd befriended Jake Miller, the rebellious teenager who lived 2 streets over. Jake had a reputation for defying the HOA's rules. He once spray-painted freedom on the community bulletin board, and he hated Victoria almost as much as I did. Together, Sophie and Jake began digging deeper into Victoria's past, sneaking around the neighborhood to gather intel while I focused on setting traps for her. They were reckless, yes, but their energy reminded me of why I was fighting in the first place: to give them a future free from fear. Still, every time they left the house, my heart raced. What if Victoria caught them? What if she hurt them, as she has? The days passed. Our plans started coming together. Using old security footage from neighbors' cameras and documents Martha had secretly collected, we uncovered a web of corruption that went deeper than I ever imagined. Victoria hadn't just manipulated the HOA. She'd embezzled funds, forged signatures, and even orchestrated smear campaigns against anyone who dared oppose her. But the biggest bombshell came when Jake found a folder labeled Property Records in Victoria's recycling bin. Inside were blueprints of the neighborhood, including the illegal shortcut through my backyard. She'd known all along it wasn't legal, yet she'd used it anyway. Armed with this evidence, I felt unstoppable. Or so I thought. Just as I was about to confront her, I received an anonymous text message late one night. "Stop digging, or your daughter pays the price." My blood ran cold. Who else was involved in this? And how far was Victoria willing to go to protect her secrets? I couldn't sleep that night. The anonymous text message replayed in my mind like a broken record, each word heavier than the last. "Stop digging, or your daughter pays the price." It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. Victoria had crossed a line she couldn't come back from, and I knew I couldn't back down now. But the shadowy figure outside my house made one thing clear. She was watching me. Every move I made, every step I took, she was 2 steps ahead. Or so she thought. The next morning, I installed hidden cameras around my property, small, discreet devices that blended into the surroundings. If Victoria wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure every move she made was recorded. Little did she know her downfall was already in motion. The real breakthrough came when Jake hacked into Victoria's personal email account. Sophie and I had argued with him about it. Breaking into someone's private communications felt wrong, even for her. But desperation pushed us forward. What we found was worse than we imagined. Emails revealed that Victoria had been blackmailing several neighbors, threatening to expose their secrets unless they followed her orders. One woman had lost custody of her child because Victoria leaked private information to her ex-husband. Another man had been forced to sell his home after she fabricated evidence of unpaid taxes. The worst part? None of them had fought back. They were too scared, too defeated. Armed with this damning evidence, I called an emergency HOA meeting under the guise of discussing neighborhood safety. Victoria arrived looking smug, unaware that her empire was about to crumble. As the meeting began, I stood up and addressed the room, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We all know how much Victoria cares about our community," I said, projecting calm confidence. Then I turned on the projector. The screen lit up with screenshots of her emails, videos of her illegal shortcut through my backyard, and even footage of her throwing a tantrum at a neighbor who dared question her authority. Gasps filled the room as the truth unfolded before their eyes. Victoria's face turned pale, then red with fury. She tried to deny everything, but the proof was undeniable. Just as I thought I'd won, though, something unexpected happened. A man burst into the room, a stranger none of us recognized. He walked straight to Victoria and whispered something in her ear. Her expression shifted from panic to icy determination. Whatever he said changed everything. As the crowd murmured in confusion, I realized the fight wasn't over yet. The folder in Victoria's hands felt like a ticking time bomb. Whatever was inside, it gave her a dangerous glimmer of confidence, one I hadn't seen since the beginning of our war. She stood up abruptly, silencing the murmurs in the room with a single icy glare. "This isn't over," she hissed, clutching the folder to her chest as if it were her lifeline. Then, without another word, she stormed out of the meeting hall, leaving behind a stunned audience. My heart pounded as I watched her leave. Had I underestimated her again? The weight of uncertainty settled heavily on my shoulders. For all my planning and evidence gathering, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious folder would change everything, and not in my favor. Later that night, Sophie came home visibly shaken. Jake had told her something he'd overheard while eavesdropping near Victoria's house. Apparently, the man who delivered the folder wasn't just any stranger. He was a private investigator hired by Victoria years ago to dig up dirt on everyone in the neighborhood. That folder likely contained secrets about all of us, not just me. Secrets so damaging they could destroy lives. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about taking down Victoria anymore. It was about protecting my family and neighbors from whatever chaos she might unleash next. But how do you fight someone armed with your darkest truths? As I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me, I wondered if I'd pushed too far. Was there still a way to stop her before she burned the entire neighborhood to the ground? Determined to stay one step ahead, I decided to confront Martha, the only person who seemed to know more about Victoria than anyone else. When I arrived at her house, She looked paler than usual, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Ethan," she said gravely. "That folder. It's not just blackmail material. It's leverage." Before I could ask what she meant, we heard a loud crash outside. Someone, or something, had knocked over her mailbox. Peering through the curtains, I saw a shadowy figure retreating into the darkness, carrying what looked like an envelope. Martha grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. "They're coming for us," she whispered, "and they won't stop until we're silenced." As I turned back to question her further, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. The footsteps outside grew louder, each one echoing like a countdown to disaster. My pulse raced as I grabbed a flashlight from Martha's kitchen counter, its weak beam cutting through the suffocating darkness. "Stay behind me," I whispered to her, though I wasn't sure how much protection I could offer against whoever, or whatever, was out there. The front door creaked open slowly, and for a moment all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Then a voice broke the silence. "Ethan? It's Jake." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Jake stumbled inside, his face pale and streaked with dirt. In his hands, he clutched the envelope we'd seen earlier. "They tried to take this," he panted, holding it out to me. "But I got away." Inside the envelope were documents, photos, letters, and bank statements linking Victoria not only to blackmail, but also to illegal property deals that implicated some of the most powerful people in town. This wasn't just about Maplewood anymore. It was bigger than any of us. Armed with this new evidence, I knew what I had to do. Early the next morning, I sent copies of everything to local news outlets and law enforcement agencies. By noon, the story had exploded online, painting Victoria as the villain she truly was. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, camped outside her house, and grilled terrified neighbors who had once feared her wrath. For the first time, I saw cracks in her armor. She appeared on her porch, disheveled and desperate, trying to spin lies to the cameras. But no one believed her. Not after the mountain of proof we'd unleashed. Within days, she was arrested, stripped of her position in the HOA, and left utterly humiliated. Yet even as justice seemed within reach, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Why had the private investigator delivered that folder if it only sealed Victoria's fate? And why did Jake look so uneasy when I thanked him for risking his life to retrieve it? As the dust began to settle, Sophie and I stood on our porch watching the sunset, a rare moment of peace after weeks of chaos. Neighbors who had once avoided us now waved warmly, grateful for what we'd done. But just as I started to let my guard down, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, no stamp, just my name scrawled across the envelope in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photograph, the same picture Martha had shown me before, except this time the man's face wasn't scratched out. It was clear now. It was Victoria's husband, long presumed dead. On the back, 2 words were written in bold black ink. "You're next." Before I could process what it meant, my phone buzzed with an unknown number flashing on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. A low, distorted voice spoke just 3 words, "Enjoy your victory." Then the line went dead.